to Adjust Inc. presents If Testimony Was a Person, the podcast where we talk to professionals of all kinds about their testimony, professionally and personally. Today we have a person who has done a lot in the way of education, healing. She is a social worker by trade, and later became a career educator, and then went back and used that social work credential to do some extraordinary stuff in neurofeedback and counseling, and you might even say healing and inner wellness work, right? Ladies and gentlemen, meet Anna Marsh.
Thank you, Dan.
It's very good to have you here. And so you were born in the U.S., but raised in Colombia for some time. Tell us about that.
So my mom came, I guess, when she was pregnant. That time, I don't know all the story behind that exactly, but she came, and I was born here. And about when I was 9 months to a year, I guess the child care provider wasn't really taking good care of me, so she went to Colombia to visit the family. And my grandmother asked, why don't you leave her here for a year? And that year turned into quite a lot of years, which I'm very grateful actually that happened, because I felt like I grew up with a huge amount of family, cousins, aunts, uncles, my grandma, my grandpa. So it was, very close. And then when I was 13, we happened to be at home, and my grandmother's brother's wife asks, my mom is visiting, so she's visiting, and she's like, why don't you take her back to New York? And she looked at me and she says, I don't know, I want her to come. And so she asks me, I kind of shrugged my shoulders, but I didn't really want to come. I just didn't want to I felt bad saying no, I guess. So that's all it took. Next day, she was getting my paperwork back again together, and came back here. And came back to New York. Didn't speak the language. First day I walked into a classroom at St. Patrick's Junior High School. I remember I walk in and people are saying hi, and I didn't even know what to respond to that. I'm like,
You went in public school?
no, I went to Catholic school for the first until I finished high school. I mean junior high school. I'm
Junior
sorry.
high.
And then for high school, I went to public school.
I see.
So
You
it was like a year and a half, 2 years.
that story, how you started out in life, demonstrates that the adults in our lives may love us, but they don't always have all the answers, and they're doing the best that they can. And so you came to New York at what age?
I came back when I was 13.
13, and then went to middle school. So yeah, give me that snapshot of your first day at high school. I mean at middle school in New York.
So again, I walk in, and some, of course, new kid. This is around February, at the beginning of March that I walk in. I don't know. I don't remember exactly which month. I walk in, some kids say hi, and I still remember. And then I'm like, don't know what to say, because I didn't even know to say hi back, because it was English, and even though it's simple, right? But at that time, it didn't feel simple. I was so scared. And then they start giggling and laughing. But, I pushed through, because that's what I had to do. And just, little by little, I adjusted and did pretty well in junior high school, and then moved on to high school. And I had to go to the local high school, because at that point now, my family couldn't afford Catholic school for the rest of that time. So I went to Seward Park High School at that time.
Seward Park High School. That was
a long
One of
time.
the old school classic high schools in Manhattan.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I used to live in the projects by Baruch, so Baruch Project, FDR Drive and Delancey. So that's where I used to
Those
live.
buildings seem endless. Like when you're driving by on a
Well,
FDR, you see buildings and buildings.
yeah, so I was right on that first building by FDR and
Mm-hmm.
Delancey, and so I lived there until I was 18. And unfortunately, those were probably the worst 5 years of my entire life living there. My stepdad um, was a good provider, but very abusive, and there were lots of things that happened. So eventually, I just couldn't take it anymore, and it was a whole ordeal to get out of there. My mom did help me out, and we had to plan this whole thing about how I was going to get out, and
Wow.
um, so we did, and from then on, it just kind of
So your mom
continued.
stayed in the relationship, but you made your way out of the house.
Yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
she stayed in the relationship, and she stayed. I mean, they were together for until he passed away 2020. And there were a lot of things that happened, but kind of, I mean, it was a huge journey because I had to learn how to forgive and let go, but not forgive for the sense of the other person, but realizing that forgiveness is not about the other person, but about
About your
you healing.
release. Yeah.
So it was quite a lot of stuff that happened, but now I can appreciate it because I can see how the woman that has made me. So
Yeah, I can imagine. Now, let me ask your decision. I mean, we're skipping ahead a few years, but your decision later to go to social work school, was there any connection between some of those bumps and bruises that you got in your childhood and that decision?
100%. I mean, at first, when I was a child, I wanted to be a pilot, and then I wanted to be an astronaut, then a pilot. And then once all that started happening, I just wanted to help people, and
Yeah.
and I think like a lot of us in mental health field, we want to help others because in a way we want to help ourselves.
Yeah.
So that became my kind of life journey. So I went to social work. At first, I started with psychology and counseling as a minor at Hunter. I did was my bachelor's, major and minor, and then I started looking into masters. And when I started looking into masters, they were explained that the psychology degree would take longer and I would be able to do. And of course, I was living on my own since I was 18, working 2 jobs, going to school, like all this stuff. So I needed to find what would be more productive for me to be able to do and still be able to do the work to help people. So I ended up going into social work, which
Now,
is,
you were at Hunter for your undergrad.
yes.
I'm just, because they had such a great, kind of highly esteemed social work program. Why didn't you stay at Hunter? Maybe.
They accepted me twice, but I had, so I was blessed enough that I don't remember how, but somebody had informed me about this program called Project 1000, where you apply. They help you apply. You have to be Latino, if I remember correctly, and they would apply for graduate programs for you. So they will pay for all the process, and they did. So I got into Columbia University, NYU, Fordham, University of Chicago. They even paid for my ticket to go and see the school. I remember at that time. Um, one of the top schools in Minnesota, Hawaii. So there were a lot of them. So I had to decide, and it was like, okay,
I'll take
Hunter,
the Ivy League
Ivy
route.
League. So because I knew, but then the next goal was how do I go there without me having to pay or without having to get out of there with a big debt. So I happened to find out about the Department of Education that was paying for master's degrees, and you would have to do a year for a year after for that after you graduated, and they covered my full tuition to go to Columbia. So Columbia, Hunter, both great schools, but
Yeah,
hey,
yeah, of course.
like if I
So,
had that opportunity, why not take it?
Absolutely. Now, how did it feel? I mean, you've had plenty of success in your life and done have some accomplishments, but back then you were still, I suppose, 20, 21 years old. How did it feel having the opportunity to go to all these prestigious places in New York to get your graduate education?
Um, Humbling, but I don't know that I could really. I was in fight or flight all my life for years. I don't think
Mm-hmm.
I got out of fight or flight until not too long ago, where I've kind of
Mm.
really got into a lot of the trauma work that I do, and I
Yeah.
realized how much I've been in fight or flight for 30 plus years, I feel like.
You might not have been able to smell the roses back
So,
then.
yeah, so
Yeah.
it was like great, and I felt, I was, it felt nice, but at the same time, it wasn't like, oh my God, let me celebrate. It just, I was happy to know that I was
Mm-hmm.
able to get into all these schools, and that I had the choice. But at the same time, it felt really stressful because sometimes when you have too many choices, it feels really stressful.
Yeah.
So I felt stressed, and then like sometimes you stress over the silliest things, and like that's like a good problem to have if you go
Yeah.
now in retrospect. But I remember feeling really stressed about like where am I going with school, because
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to make the best choice and take the opportunity. Again, Hunter is a difficult program to get into for the
Yeah.
masters, and I got into it twice. uh, and I deferred these other schools for 3 years until I finally found the scholarship. They told me that they were even betting at Columbia, that they were betting whether I was going to go that third year or not. Because first of all, I had to work. I was going to school. I was doing all these things. But I mean, I needed to figure out how to get the money and all that. So
Right.
finally, I made the decision to. I don't remember how, but I think it was like Columbia was like one of the top programs at that time for social work. Um, it was an Ivy League school, and I don't know if it was so much because it was an Ivy League, but it was a really good school. So Hunter
Yeah.
and Columbia were kind of very close
Mm-hmm.
in competition, and I
Mm-hmm.
think Columbia just gave that extra boost. So I decided on Columbia, and I have to say I was grateful to have gone there because I feel like if I would have gone to Hunter, I would have gotten a lot similar from what I had in undergrad. While
Okay.
Columbia gives you a different bit of a different experience in some ways,
Yeah.
and so I was happy to.
So you graduate with your MSW,
Hmm.
and what happens then?
So I started working with the DOE. I got a job as a social worker. I worked in the Bronx. I always say in I worked in the South Bronx. I worked in Bushwick. I worked in Williamsburg, in Bed-Stuy, in Rikers Island. All these places that have been gentrified, except Rikers Island.
Except Rikers.
So, but yeah, so I worked in the Bronx for a while, and around uh, right around before the Twin Towers and all that stuff that happened, 9/11, I had transferred to a different program that was like an adult program for parents, and they served, but it was still in the Bronx, and then all that stuff happened, and it was like the commute just was becoming more and more difficult. So I decided to apply. So I applied, and that's when I started working in Bed-Stuy and Williamsburg and things like that. So I was working in, again, it was always schools with communities that were black and brown kids
Mm-hmm.
that came from communities like mine that had some of the same struggles. So for me, that was key, like really
Yeah.
being there and doing all that work.
And you're a bilingual social worker,
Mm-hmm.
and you are by just by default, you're kind of doing equity work um, because you are in charge of providing services to mostly underserved kids. So
Mm-hmm.
you end up in Brooklyn, and then how do you make the choice to become a school administrator? I mean, was it something you knew that you wanted to do?
So I don't know why, but people kept trying to push me to become an administrator throughout time. I'm like, no, I don't want to do this. Like it looked like a deep dark hole in my head. Like, oh God, I don't want to go down that hole. But eventually, I was feeling burned out just because when you work and you're dealing with and I was always as a social worker, I feel like I've always had a lot of instinct, right? So I would always have, I mean, trauma after trauma after trauma after trauma. Like that's what you happen. One kid came out, one other one came in. So that's what we do in the work. But when you're in
Yeah.
a school, that's what. So I wasn't doing the. A lot of times schools kind of interplay social workers, guidance counselors. They do a lot of that work. I was doing literally the social work, right? Like I was,
Okay.
and I'm blessed to say that in every school that I worked, they allowed me to do what I felt like I needed to do for kids. So
That's really good.
it is. I could not. I cannot complain. I was always blessed in that. So I, I I started at the Brooklyn School for Social Justice, or it was at that time the Bushwick School for Social Justice, in 2004, the second year. And at that time, immediately the administration put me kind of to be part of the administrative team in some ways and be part of this, when a lot of the conversations and stuff happened. And again, they kept saying, when you become the principal, when you become, I'm like, looking at them like, you're nuts. Like, that is not happening. And then, now I've been in the school for a while, right? So the principals get promoted to do other things. They leave, things happen. There was a teacher who then became an assistant principal, and then he became the principal because I had not even put my name in the. So then I decided to go for school administration and become an assistant principal, and I did that for a few years, and I really, 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 really did not like that job too much because it was I was doing the APO, which was all operations, and I wanted to deal with the people. I wanted to deal with the kids. That's what
Yeah.
I always did. So eventually, when one of the administrators leaves to go and do something else at Central, this person who had went from teacher to assistant principal, then he became the principal.
Right.
It made sense because he was ready and he was like climbing. I was not interested. Excuse me. A couple of years later, he falls in love, like right around the same time, and so he falls in love. His wife or girlfriend moves to Washington. He is going back and forth, and at this point, I'm still not deciding. And I meet with the former administrators, all of them, because we would go for breakfast every so often. And then like, oh, so you're gonna become the principal? And I'm like, and then I start giving all these things why, right? Like, and then they're looking at me like, those are all excuses. Who knows the school better than you do? And I'm like, oh. So then I go home and I discuss it with my husband and whatever, and then I decide, okay, you know what? And I get back, and as soon as I told him, like, hey, I'm thinking, he didn't even let me finish. He knew, and he was like, immediately he started looking for a job away, and he moved to Washington. So he was a principal for 2 years. And I became the principal, and I did that for 7 years. And I actually did enjoy a lot of the work because I got to do a lot of creative things. I got to see a lot of things. My graduation rates, by the time I finished, my 4, 5, 6 year graduation rates had gone up. Before I took it on, the last couple of years before that, unfortunately, it had been like 58 and 62%. It went to 80s. It was in the 80s. Was going up. This is unfortunately even through COVID. We saw that kids. A lot of all my kids. It was a Title I school, 100% free lunch. Like everybody got free lunch. There were a lot of things going on, and yet I had kids. We had kids taking college classes. I became a yoga instructor, so I used to do yoga with the principal. And I got to do all these creative things around mental health. I started, teachers realized that they could have some freedom in terms of exploring a lot of the social emotional. So we did a lot of social emotional work. At first, I was focusing just on the academics, and then I realized, you know what? When sometimes the English people or teacher ignores the English department, and then the math person ignores the math department, and I'm ignoring the social emotional, and I know that if kids are in a better place, they're going to do better. So I started like, you know what, I'm going to implement this. So I started working on creating a single shepherd model. So I put my counselors to rotate with the kids for the 4 years. I started doing, and sure enough, I started seeing all those results. And we did a lot of things, implementing music in classrooms, looking at the lighting, looking at different things, and teachers helped me do like little studies. And then COVID hit, and then, but we started doing, that's when I started becoming much more aware about trauma work, because therapy for me was like, it was like okay, so how do you move forward? But then I started discovering trauma work and understanding what you can do and really learning about neuroscience and um, mindfulness and all these things. So as a principal, of course, I keep educating myself to become the
Right.
best administrator I could and to do the best job I could as an administrator. But I became obsessed learning about trauma and how to treat trauma and how to work with trauma and understand that you can actually treat and heal trauma. That people don't have to carry PTSD around all their life or whatever it is. And it obviously it's not possible every time for everyone. For for the majority of people, you can see tremendous change with when you do these practices. So it was pretty awesome.
So you retire as a principal in what year?
I retired in 2021.
Which means that from 2014, you had that was your position.
As a principal. So
Right.
yes. So well, at first I was really just trying to keep afloat. Like,
Yeah,
what am I
trying to make
doing?
sure your
Right?
school stays open and all like
Exactly, and
that.
trying to do
Yeah.
all that stuff and all the things coming at you. And when you work in schools that are in poor neighborhoods, they do a lot of dumping of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
negative stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
then they say, you see, they're not successful. And it was like, well, that is not true.
Mm.
But unfortunately, people don't know all the politics around this stuff. But whatever, that's not here nor there. The fact is that we were able to see tremendous changes in our community. I mean, I remember at first when I began as a principal, the 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 levels, sometimes the fights that were happening throughout that time. I had so many kids in foster care, so many kids struggling. I remember sitting in my office like, oh God, what am I gonna do? I think about that, I cry. So that's something that took me down to figure out answers for them.
So
Sorry,
that's okay.
but what is that?
So what makes you emotional is just thinking about the suffering that was taking place in the school building.
It was tough. It was tough to see, and it's interesting because when I started doing mindfulness and
Yeah.
meditation, I would go into classrooms because teachers were afraid sometimes to do it themselves. Like, I'm like, what are the kids going to do? They're just going to either do it or not, right? Like,
What
so
were they afraid of, you think? Just it's not going to work. It's corny. It's weird.
the kids' reactions and that they were going to push back and that they
Like
were going to
that,
have
yeah.
whatever it is, right? Like, there's so many things that people assume.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, okay, I'm going to just go and do it myself. So I would go and tell them, hey, this is why. And I did it from a very neuroscience perspective. And I remember when I first did my first in a class, I was like, let's practice for 5 minutes. And the other kids all sit there. And I just remember the moment where everything just went like really quiet. But my black boys, it was such a huge lift for them. It was like, Miss, I've never had the chance to feel, I feel so different. Like, and it was so beautiful to see, but painful to know that they carried so much. So I was like, okay, maybe this is coincidence. And then again and again and again. And then I started doing some later on with principals. Some of my biggest fans who were the black male principals because they all carried so much. The males, right? More so, but the females as well. But I think the males, I mean, I did a lot of stuff. Then later on, I started doing trauma healing, trauma-informed practices before COVID. And then all of a sudden COVID hit, so I was already doing all these things. Thank God.
That's pretty profound what you've said so far, because what I'm hearing you say is that
Sorry, I always cry when
no,
I get
listen,
emotional about this stuff.
I appreciate
I
your
try not to,
transparency
but it
and
doesn't work.
openness about the emotion. What I'm hearing is that the kids, you sense that the kids really needed this infusion of mindfulness and a different kind of intervention for social emotional stuff. You brought it to the teachers resisted it by and large. Probably you had a
At
few,
first, yes,
right?
definitely. But then they started coming around. But
And then you went and did it yourself, which probably helped people to then see the kids are responding to this. What am I afraid of?
And so at one point I had the David Lynch Foundation that were trying to create a quiet time program, and then they started and they trained some teachers and students and staff, and we were trying to pass this program, but we only got 72%. And usually it takes a few years for that, but we were like doing it, trying to do it very quickly. So we only got 72%, and there was a percentage that was it, and then they like a percentage wasn't sure, and then a small percentage said no, but they were like, okay, that's okay, we still can do mindfulness. And then we started doing, like I said, these little research and studies. So some teachers, like my 12th grade teachers at that time, were doing music in the classroom. My 11th grade teachers were doing mindfulness. Some of them were implementing. I don't remember. I remember we did all these little studies to see, and it was really awesome to see how kids just responded to that. In addition to that, the single shepherd model. Then we had social workers and mental health work in the school, in the building. So we had those providers that did
Yeah.
that, and we had like pantries and food and all these things. So we had all these resources to really kind. So all that really, I think, made a huge impact. And then I would do yoga. Like I said, yoga. But again, everything that I did was very intentional. How do we help the community
Yeah.
get better? So I started bringing parents. Then I started doing some personal development workshops with parents. And that was amazing to see.
I can imagine.
The kids and the students, I mean, the students and the parents that did, all the kids that came. And then we started training some kids, and those kids trained other kids. And all those kids that started, when I started watching the videos a few years later, many of them, by their own declaration, oh, I used to get in fights all the time, I used to this, and then they all start telling, I started noticing, honor society, honor society, honor society, but they did not come in honor society.
Right.
Many came with IEP, came in all that stuff, and all that made such a huge difference. In addition to that, then the parents, and then I taught parents how to meditate. So parents would get really excited coming to the workshops. And then I saw parents, these are parents in poverty who started businesses, who bought property, who did all kinds of things, transforming their lives. And I remember there was one parent like, hey, you're the only one I haven't seen, I haven't heard. I'm sorry that the workshops didn't work. Because I thought, she's like, are you kidding, Miss Marsh? I used to, and then she tells me something like, oh, okay, I didn't realize that. And but she went like on telling me like how it had worked, and right, and then I just seeing that impact was amazing, to see how it transformed. And the beautiful thing is that you see the whole family. I keep hitting the microphone, sorry. How you could see whole families transforming. It wasn't just the kids. And when you worked with the parents, then all those kids, even when the kids didn't come to the workshops themselves sometimes, the whole family transformed, and you saw those kids doing so much better.
Right.
So that was a way of doing parental engagement for me.
Yes,
So it was pretty awesome, and I'm very grateful. And so now I have parents that still text me and tell me, they have a lot of love for me, and I'm sure it's because I was a principal and all that stuff, but. I had a kid that would always say, Miss, you're my favorite principal. I'm like, how many principals do you have? And then she's like, no, in general. But I would hear that all the time, and like the last evaluation, but it was that. It was the being able to feel heard and seen, and my staff made sure that they were heard and seen through COVID. I was very proud because when kids showed up in that line, most of my teachers, the first thing they did is, how are you today?
Yeah.
Is everything okay? If a kid couldn't finish something, they gave them extra time. But all that was work that we put in for years, and it really paid off because that COVID time was tough. But it got us through, and I feel like we were much more prepared, even though we weren't fully prepared. Nobody was. Than most schools.
Let me just say, in the mental health field, I always recount the story of. There was a few days in March of 2020 when the news was going ballistic with reports of, COVID-19 and, this may be pandemic status and we don't know what's going to happen. And the phones went quiet for about 2 days, and then when they closed the schools, the day after that, our phones exploded,
I cannot imagine.
and we started taking on maybe double the clients. I mean, instead of cutting our staff down, which a lot of food service and other places had to do, we had to hire people, and we did sessions, including myself, who was the vice president of the New Hope Mental Health, which is our larger practice. Did sessions from day to night, and still could not cover all of the people who wanted sessions. Higher levels of um, family situations in the home that weren't good because people were home with each other. Parents who weren't used to being with their children all day were under a lot of stress. Children were under stress because they didn't have their social outlets. School was taken. It was just a lot, and many adults who were high functioning people who you wouldn't see as people having mental health problems suffered anxiety just from overexposure to news reports about this deadly pandemic. So in schools, the work that you were doing was absolutely very important. So kudos for being brave enough to bring mindfulness into the school, and then the timely um, aspect of you having it there during a COVID, I'm sure was very helpful.
It was interesting because when the trauma informed schools, like that year before, like people with social emotion we had started doing, but that year, like that September, I think it was, I had a whole presentation on trauma informed schools, and then I changed it to trauma informed healing focused school. And I actually did a presentation for Columbia University. Columbia had invited me to speak that June of 2020. And then they had to cancel the event. And then I was um, I'm humbled or grateful, many words I guess I can say, that they decided to ask me to be the presenter for that. So I ended up doing a virtual thing, and it was called Schools That Heal. Schools That Heal, how social workers, the role the social workers play in it. I don't remember the second part of the name, but it was a 3 hour kind of training that I did, or presentation that I did for Columbia that June, and it was around that. It was all the stuff that already had been, because we had been doing so many of these things, and I feel like it was great. And throughout the pandemic, throughout that time, I would meet with kids and groups and different things, and I would check, how are you guys doing? And time again, oh no, my teachers listen to us, our teachers give us time, our teachers are right, they were very supportive. So the community in the school really responded, really, just like the teachers really came along, and everybody was just playing a huge role, and I think that they felt that peace and the freedom, wow, versus unfortunately that doesn't happen everywhere, and it's sad to know, because what you're saying happened then is still happening now. People have no idea how much kids are suffering. Suicide rates, and particularly among kids and young people of color. Suicide rates are higher and now, and all that stuff. Of course, all the stuff that happened, all the trauma, all the things that are in the media, all the stuff that have happened. It's quite a lot.
I want to shift gears. You since then you've retired in 21, right? And I believe you told me that it took a bit of time to change gears because you actually may have been suffering your own burnout, and that you thought you would maybe jump right into some private practice, but you needed your own time to deal with some stuff before you got into your new ventures, and I would like you to talk about those.
Thank you. So actually, my goal was to take about 4 months off and relax and whatever it was, and then start my private practice. And unfortunately, my mom came. I don't know if it's developed or was diagnosed with dementia, and all kinds of things started changing, and it was so she started. It was in my house, and things became a little bit more difficult than I expected. So, and I also realized, like, because what happened is um, I I had the time but not the age. So I knew, and part of the reason when I started thinking in 2018 that I wanted to do something different, I wasn't expecting a pandemic and all these things to happen. So
Yeah.
when I did retire, I knew that I wouldn't really start collecting pension until 55, which is next year, but which was fine because that also kind of gave me the drive. I'm gonna make this work. But I was thinking 4 months and then start, and then realized that I needed to do something because one, I'm very hyperactive, so I have to do things and I have to feel productive. And
You're
second,
diagnosing yourself as hyperactive.
well, yes, but I am. My family can tell you I don't sit still. Like I'm always having to do something. So I realized, okay, so I did start kind of doing the process for the private practice, and by October or so, I had a couple of clients in November, and it started little by little. By January, then it started growing more and more. So I started doing that, and but I focus my focus is on trauma and trauma resolution. So I love that work more than anything else. I really really enjoy seeing people transforming. Sometimes right in front of my eyes. It's
Yeah.
incredible to see when people come and have something that has been affecting them for years, and then we do some of these practices, and then they just kind of like, oh.
Talk about the neurofeedback a bit.
Well, the neurofeedback is the newer part, and it's something that I did add. In the process. So I was doing a training with Dr. Vander Kolk. The Body Keeps the Score,
Body keeps
the
score.
author,
Yeah.
and he mentioned neurofeedback and mentioned that therapists and so people just like regular folk like me, I'd become I get in trouble. I was like, oh, I didn't realize that. So I got immediately as I found out, and I became trained, and I've been now implementing it into my practice. It's incredible when you do the mapping for people. You see how what shows up in the brain correlates with the behavior. Like it's almost like you're looking into their brain. It's
Wow.
amazing. And then that you start doing the protocols based on whatever's going on in the brain. So it helps the brain balance itself in a way. It helps work through a lot of that stuff, right? So that's what we did. That's what it does. And then with therapy, you then help them process and deal with things. So somebody that may have trauma, you may see like some red here, for example, emotional part, or both sides. Oftentimes, the most so on the right side. So you want to bring down, regulate some of that for perhaps if they, especially if they're very over aroused and just get very stressed and
Trauma shows up in the right and the left brain.
yes, but more so on the right.
Mostly
And for
right.
many of the times that you see trauma, you see it childhood trauma. I don't mean like physical trauma. Physical trauma might show wherever that happened.
Right. Right.
But the trauma that from child,
Yeah.
because the amygdala, so it shows there. In fact, when I did for my training, they had to do mind mapping, and she says, "Can I ask you a question?" I'm like, "Yeah." And she's like, "Did you go through trauma when you were a child?" I'm like, "Yeah." And she's like, "Yeah, this is what that is." And I'm like, "It still shows in my brain. Are you kidding me?" So
We
so
just
that's
I just finished having a conversation with another guest about ACEs.
oh yeah. So that's one of some of the work that I was doing right before I retired. I
No,
started ACEs
for the
in the
audience.
schools.
For the audience, sorry. ACEs is adverse childhood experiences, and when you're doing that mapping, you can actually, like you said, you're actually looking at the brain and seeing the evidence
At a neuron level, yes,
Right,
you can.
right.
Definitely, you can see a lot of that. You can also see like over anxiety, depression. You can see a lot of that stuff. But then you also have all these assessments and all that stuff. So you have to put all that together. It's not just like one picture and that's it. It's all these other things. And then working along with the trauma therapy or with therapy, then you help people kind of move forward because that is helping the brain regulate, and then you are helping them by helping their brain balance. So, but it also helps with things with like performance, ADHD. ADHD
Yeah.
is actually a great form of treatment for ADHD, and yet it's still not used, and we still keep getting people medication something that has side effects and has so many things. And don't get me wrong, I know it helps manage it, but neurofeedback has actually shown evidence at level five efficacy and effectiveness in terms of actually getting rid of ADHD. And so many people suffer from ADHD, and it's an incredible amount of people. And many people go to drugs to be able to manage that level of anxiety and all the stuff that comes with that, or the level of lack of focus and all the things that come with the ADHD.
So,
and yet, what we use is medication. The same thing with depression. Yoga has shown to have better effects on depression than medication. Anxiety, the same thing. Mindfulness, breathing, all these exercises, if you do it, all really have much.
It's another show altogether. If we talk
yeah,
about
let me not go down that because I really do.
What are the incentives that unfortunately that people have to push medication when there's all these modalities of treatment that include things that are low access. Like all you need is a mat and a teacher to give the techniques and
the breathing and like all that stuff really makes a difference.
We have it right on our person. We don't have to purchase drugs or anything that might be too costly or there's no access to it. So we only have a few minutes left, and I want to talk about the, you have a couple of programs going on, and you're a private practitioner, but you are giving something this summer in the way of wellness. Talk about that.
Thank you. Yes, so I'm actually holding a retreat in the Dominican Republic. Happened to find a retreat center. It's Kira Holistic Living, and the person that created or that opened up, and it's a whole kind of following her calling kind of thing as well. I don't know her personally, but she's actually a holistic doctor. So there's going to be a lot of work. We will be having yoga and sound healing and mud bath healing. We're going to even have an excursion, but I'm going to be doing a lot of the work around releasing some of the trauma, so a lot of meditations and trauma work, and then some of the personal development workshops and work that I've done. We have seen like real amazing transformations with people. So it's a whole holistic 6 days, 5 nights. It's in the Dominican Republic. And I'm really excited. I mean, we're doing a lot of things, and my goal is that people come there. I'm sure, as so many people are burned out, and my hope is that they come out feeling renewed and finding a new purpose and creating a vision for the kind of life that they want to lead, and taking steps towards a better life for themselves.
So what are those dates for the excursion?
The excursion is going to be probably the last day, but you're talking about for the retreat. The retreat is July 31st to August 5th.
July 31st to August 5th. Wellness retreat. Anna Marsh, if people want to get in contact with you about that or about any of the work that you do, what are the best ways to contact you?
So for the retreat in particular, I'm asking for an email just so I can set up a small consultation if they have questions, and it's mindful C&C, so mindful consultant and coaching services. So I just put mindful C and C, so mindful C, the letter C, AND C @gmail.com. So
mindful C and C @gmail.com, and they can email you there, and they can get all the info they need.
Exactly.
And is that for all of any and everything that people would like to contact you about?
Well, so that's definitely for the retreat, but also for any coaching work. So I do coaching work for schools because, of course, as an administrator, I got to create that. I got to see how doing that helps kids do better, perform better academically and in life and everything. So that kind of work. So anything that has to do with coaching and consulting and that, yes. For my mental health practice is a mindful talk.
A mindful talk
@gmail.com. So a mindful talk gmail.com. My website, which is under construction right now, but is www.amindfultalk.com. Probably be done in a couple of weeks to add and change and add the neurofeedback. So it's under construction right now.
Very appropriate name, A Mindful Talk. I love it. You are doing great work. I
Thank
really
you.
appreciate your time with us. Like, subscribe, and share. You know, if testimony was a person, it's the Help to Adjust Inc. podcast. We'll see you soon. Peace and love.